Welcome back to Something in the Wilderness, where we discuss the music of Andrew McMahon from throughout his career, song by song. Thanks for joining us today. We are revisiting Andrew's latest project again, Andrew McMahon in the Wilderness. My name's Steve, and today we have Hypotect from the EDM Obscura podcast joining us. Hypotect, can you tell us a little bit about you and your show?
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, thank you for having me on. I really like the concept and what you've got going here. And so I guess a little bit about EDM Obscura. So I run a Discord server with somewhere around 900-ish EDM producers on it called The Sync, which was sort of started at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And from that, I sort of quickly ended up now running the server, I guess. And part of that was just connecting with these producers who I thought were kind of insanely talented, but maybe didn't have a platform to like put themselves out there in the way that I think that you kind of have to build a sort of brand in the kind of contemporary artistic sense, I guess.
Right.
Which I think is especially difficult when, your voice isn't part of what you're selling,
I could see that, yeah.
So EDM Obscura is kind of this like grassroots approach to the podcast model. Like instead of one famous person talking to another, it's really trying to become a platform that other people can springboard off of, like almost like a Charlie Rose approach, where I'm trying to break EDM artists as opposed to talking to artists who've already kind of broken. And as a result, I have a hard 10,000 social media follower limit on my guests. So I only talk to obscure EDM artists, essentially.
I think that's a really great idea, just building a community. That's amazing. And other people are listening and getting involved.
Right. I mean, I think if you look at the history of any artist, most artists come from some sort of scene, I guess. And I think that's increasingly difficult in the internet. I'm trying to create a place like that where people are sort of egging each other on to be better and better and get more well known as a result of that.
So how long have you been making music yourself?
I guess from a production standpoint, more seriously, maybe 2 years on and off for about 7. And I've been playing guitar for maybe 12 at this point.
Okay, cool. Now, I know that Andrew McMahon uses some synth and programming in a lot of the Wilderness albums anyway. So
Right.
When you listen to this kind of music, pop music, you probably hear it a little bit differently than us non-musicians, right?
Yeah, so I think especially with this album, and I guess recontextualizing it, and hearing it in 2020, I guess, it's kind of a lot more clear to me now than it maybe was at the time of hearing it, how much he was really borrowing from what was kind of popular in the mainstream pop version of what was happening in EDM at the time, and also the sort of what was happening in indie at the time, and really trying to take, his existing songwriting ability and kind of brand and build it off of that and break in a different way than he had previously with Something Corporate and Jack's Mannequin.
Yeah, because it definitely did feel different. It felt like he intentionally tried to do something different.
Right.
Pulled in different songwriters and producers too. So for somebody who doesn't know what EDM is, or maybe some artists that perform EDM that are more mainstream that they would know, can you give us some examples? Maybe something that you've perceived that Andrew has pulled from maybe, or been influenced by, or something like that?
Right. I mean, so there's definitely a lot of influence from like what Daft Punk was doing on, I think Random Access Memories was the album that came out the year before.
Okay. Yep.
A lot of what Odessa and Tycho and Chami were doing at the time, and maybe even a little bit of what Madeon and Robinson were doing in that era as well, with these just huge anthemic choruses, but recontextualized with a sort of indie pop sensibility.
Okay. Having a podcast specifically about one artist, it's nice to actually learn about different types of music and how they're similar and how they're different. So
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can appreciate a passion for music as a consumer, and I do wish I had the talent to make music myself, and so it's cool to talk to a musician about this. So how did you get into Andrew McMahon's music initially? Was it Something Corporate? Was it Jack's Mannequin? Was it The Wilderness where you started?
So I can actually pinpoint the exact moment, which is, I guess, probably maybe a little odd. I remember I was sitting on in my bedroom at maybe 11 o'clock at my dad's house, and I was sitting there with an acoustic guitar watching Stephen Colbert when he came on and was, talking about, I guess, his life up to that point, and played Resolution and Swim. And then I promptly went and learned both those songs on acoustic guitar that night.
So about the glass passenger area of Jack's Mannequin then.
Right.
When you came in.
That's 2008?
Yeah, 2008 was when that record came out. I saw them in concert at the Warped Tour that summer. Well, I don't know if it was the very first time he played it, but he played Swim, and I had never heard it before as a big fan. So that was my, the debut for me at least.
Right.
Was July of 2008.
Right. I think I remember seeing him at that Warped Tour as well, because I think that was my first Warped Tour.
Oh, that's awesome that you're there too. All right, well, let's look out somewhere under the canyon moon and get into the song. So I have to admit that I frequently mix this song up with High Dive off of the same record,
Oh yeah.
which is another single. Yeah, I think they sound similar, maybe have similar tones, themes, and I really enjoy both songs. But I think it's because of where they fall on the track list, honestly. Like, one's right before Cecilia and one's right after, and Cecilia being the huge hit off of the record, let's say.
Right. It's kind of like the touchstone song on that record.
Yeah, so it's like, but I can usually figure out which song it is as soon as the lyrics start. But because the album has such a consistent flow, it has same type of sound throughout. So I feel like the two songs blend really well together. Are you familiar with the song High Dive as well?
Oh yeah, yeah. I guess a lot of my background with them is listening to that album kind of on repeat while studying in college, and like
Gotcha. Yeah.
delivering pizzas at that time. And listening to like alt rock radio, you kind of couldn't get away from them.
Right.
No pun to the lyrics that song intended.
All right, let's go through some stats. So obviously the band is Andrew McMahon and the Wilderness. The song we're talking about, Canyon Moon, is track 1 on the self-titled record released on October 14th, 2014.
Yep.
Actually, almost exactly 6 years ago from today, the day we're recording. So it wasn't on any other albums, but it was released as a single. It was actually the third of 4 singles that came off of that record, which were all released before the record even came out.
I mean, that's kind of typical, I think.
Yeah, it seems typical lately, and I kind of wanted to touch on that with you, actually. So I've noticed this trend in pop music in like the last 5-6 years where they're releasing a ton of singles before the record actually comes out. Artists like Weezer and Panic at the Disco, a lot of that kind of fall into that pop rock genre.
Right.
And they're releasing like nearly half the album before the record even comes out. But I just remember a time where, you might get 1, maybe 2 singles before the record came out, and then maybe a couple more afterward once people, knew of the album. So I just found that interesting that all 4 of the singles came out before the
Right.
record even came out.
Well, I mean, if you think about the way music is consumed now versus the way it was then, I think it's a lot like more foreign to introduce a single after the albums come out because everyone sort of has access to every song on every album for free infinitely.
That's a good point. It's all out there as a single, as a record, however you want to consume it, right?
Right. Whereas say maybe in like the mid to early 2000s, there was still some barrier of entry. Like you had to go download the entire album or buy a CD. God forbid, where you could still pull songs from that people hadn't heard. Whereas typically now, if you listen to one of the singles, you're probably going to go hear the entire album the next day.
Yeah, I see your point there. That's a very good point. So it's already out there. I can consume it as a single if I want to on Spotify or Apple or wherever I get my music, or listen to the whole record.
Right.
I personally prefer to consume it as a full album. Usually, it's rare that I go and listen to one specific song. It's either an album or a playlist of many songs. So for me,
yeah, no, I'm kind of an album person too. I'll
yeah,
if I'm like going on like a drive or something, I'll put on an album rather than playlists. Like rarely, like if I'm trying to like get into a new genre, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But when I go to a specific artist, I'm usually going to a specific album, I guess, rather than like the singles.
Yep. So Andrew McMahon has a video of this song posted on his YouTube page, but I wouldn't call it an official video. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's just a dashboard cam footage at night driving on a highway. Have you ever seen that before?
Yeah, I was watching that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found that interesting because, there's usually either an official video or a lyric video nowadays or no video at all.
Right.
And I feel like this one falls somewhere in between. It's like somebody took some footage and someone thought it was cool and said, hey, I'm just going to set this music to it.
Well, I think that's actually a more maybe contemporary model and was maybe even ahead of its time because I think that's what happens with a lot of things where people are sort of realizing that maybe the lyric video model is almost like dead and you kind of have to have some visual footage going on to get people to watch a YouTube video.
Yeah, the lyric videos do seem to be a trend that came and just about went pretty quick. I mean, they're still out there, but yeah, not as common as maybe like 3-4 years ago.
Right, absolutely.
This song was co-written by Sam Hollander and Kevin Griffin and Andrew McMahon, of course.
Right.
Most of the songs on this record were co-writes, but this is the only song on the record that Hollander and Griffin helped to write. So you said you knew who Sam Hollander was?
Yeah, I'm very, very familiar with his work. It occupied a lot of my teenage years.
Okay, yeah, and I didn't realize he's kind of a behind-the-scenes guy, but I didn't realize who he was, and I was amazed to find out how many songs he's co-written. In fact, how many songs that I'm a huge fan of that he's co-written.
Right. I mean, you look at like Hand Clap by Fits in the Tantrum. You look at, a lot of later era Panic at the Disco. mean, even, High Hopes, which is now, bigger than I Write Since Not Tragedies was, which is kind of crazy to have, that big of a hit on your fifth album or whatever.
It's like he's a hit machine. Some writers and producers, it's like they just know how to write hits, and this guy must be one of them. He seems like a highly sought after writer-producer.
Right.
He wrote a song on Katy Perry's first album, which was a while back now, before most people knew who Katy Perry was. And more recently, speaking of female artists, he's also written Jewel's latest single. I don't know if you're familiar with her work.
Not at all.
Yeah, so it just seems like quite a diverse array of pop musicians or artists, if you will. Are you familiar with the work of Kevin Griffin?
One thing I wanted to point out about Sam is I think he's very good at like just core songwriting. Like I think he understands on a very deep level what makes a good song, and I think that kind of translates limitlessly beyond genre, which is I think almost like a lost art at this point.
He definitely has that knack. He has that talent. He knows what people want to hear. He knows what works. I think there's something to that too, and I'm sure as a musician, figuring out what works for you as an artist, but what works for the listener as well.
Right. And to speak to Kevin, I'm not nearly as familiar with Better Than Ezra. I had to learn their song Good, which if you know Better Than Ezra, you know the song Good.
Oh, yeah.
I learned it for a band audition when I was maybe 17, which did not go very well at all. That was the last I talked to those people.
When I was in high school, Good was huge on the radio. There was In the Blood and King of New Orleans, and then my personal karaoke favorite, Desperately Wanting. I sing that song. It's kind of a depressing song. Doesn't sound like something someone would really sing at karaoke, but I don't know. I just really love it, and I give it my all when I go up and do karaoke. They've also released, I'm talking about all their 90s stuff right now, but they've been making music for 25 years. And I know Kevin Griffin as the lead singer of Better Than Ezra, as the lead singer, songwriter, guitarist. I've never really thought of him as a co-writer with other artists until now. I still follow him. He released a solo album about a year ago, and I think that Andrew McMahon fans would also enjoy that album.
Oh, cool.
I wouldn't say the sound is really similar, but you could draw some comparisons.
Right.
So this song was produced by McMahon and Mike Viola and James Flanagan, and Flanagan did the programming and some keyboards. Viola handled the bass, and McMahon played the piano and, of course, the lead vocals. So basically that trio was the band on this record.
And props to Viola. The bass playing on this song is so insanely good for a pop song.
He's another one of those unsung talents like Sam Hollander, and I talked about him on a previous episode because it was the same type of deal as Hollander. I dug in. I could not believe how much he's been involved in, how much he's done, and he's a writer, he's a producer, he's performed, he has his own records he puts out. So very talented guy, and I agree with you that the music on this track is phenomenal, and he's a big part of that.
Fun fact: he was one of the songwriters on the Get Him to the Greek soundtrack.
I love that soundtrack; it's hilarious.
It's amazing, and I think still listenable. And I think Andrew McMahon fans might like it sonically.
I'll have to go back and listen to those. I think I may own that movie, believe it or not, on DVD, so I may have to just watch that one again. So I want to talk a little bit about the live history of Canyon Moon. I learned on Setlist FM that it's been played live 257 times,
Jeez.
But it actually hasn't been played since 2018 live. I don't know if you've paid attention to the live streams that Andrew's been doing this year. So he does them on Instagram, just him and a piano. And then he's actually put on a couple drive-in shows, one of which that he's live streamed. And he hasn't played any of them, nor did he play it in all of 2019 while he was touring basically the whole year. So it's almost like once his third record, Upside Down Flowers, came out, he just stopped playing that one for some reason. It left the set list completely. And
right.
I was kind of curious about why that would happen, but I guess you got to make room for the new stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's only, so much room for so many songs,
Yeah.
Like he doesn't put his his fan favorite song barely makes it into the set list, Well, I'm talking, I guess, specifically about Constantine, which is, I think, my personal favorite of his. But how many times can you actually play, a 9 to 12 minute song, depending on however long he wants to stretch it out?
Right, and I've read some interviews with him where that's mainly why he says he doesn't play it is because of the length. And he said, I can play 3 other songs in the time that I would be playing Constantine, and I would just rather be playing 3 other songs.
Right, I can imagine it's probably very draining to perform as well.
Yeah. Well, Andrew is playing 3 more drive-in shows this fall. He's just in the Southwest. He's just announced that this past week. So maybe those fans will get lucky and he'll play Canyon Moon again. Or maybe in 4 years, they'll do a 10 years of Andrew McMahon in the Wilderness, like he's done for the Transit record from Jack's Mannequin. And maybe in 4 years, we'll start hearing Canyon Moon in concert again. I don't know. Have you ever seen Andrew McMahon live?
Oh, I've seen Andrew, like I said, quite a few times. At least twice that I can remember. Once being at Warped Tour, probably another Warped Tour. At some of like the Next Big Thing shows that 97X in Tampa would put on, he was frequently on those. He was frequently on a lot of the shows they put on, and I saw him at a lot of them as a result. I don't know that I ever went to a specific Andrew McMahon concert per se.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen the Wilderness twice at festivals. So out of the 4 times I've seen them, twice has been festivals. And one was a radio festival up in Detroit, where I'm originally from. It was Weezer, Panic at the Disco, and Andrew McMahon in the Wilderness, all there on one stage. But I know they played Canyon Moon that night, and then I saw the band at Bunbury Music Festival in Cincinnati in 2018, and they did play that song that time as well. But apparently that's right around the time they stopped playing it.
Yeah, you got it just under the wire, so to speak.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of like it because it's kind of, I know you compared it to High Dive, but I think it's kind of like more odd in his discography than that, because I think it has like a lot of more like dark chords than his songs usually have in them, I think.
It does have a dark feel to it. I agree with that.
And it's also like really fast for an Andrew McMahon song.
Mm-hmm.
It's got like such a just such a like speedy pulse to it. I was like trying to work out the chords on like a piano the other day, and the chord changes are weirdly fast in it, and the chord progression is also kind of odd in the way that it like never really resolves in the way that songs typically do to the one.
Yeah, and it sounds great live, but on the record, it actually sounds like, it's funny you mentioned that, because it actually sounds like he's played the song and then it was sped up in post a little bit. I'm not saying there's any truth to that. I'm just saying that that's kind of how it feels to me sometimes with that song. But I know that's probably not true because I've heard it live before.
Right. And it's weird how he can make it feel a lot less fast without reducing the tempo when he plays it acoustically.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It translates incredibly well to an acoustic, though. It gives it a different feel, but like not without changing too much about it, you know?
Yeah, and interestingly, there is a Canyons EP with 4 songs from the self-titled record, and that one, it's not on the Canyons EP. But I thought that would be a really cool addition to that EP because I would love to hear it acoustically. And lucky for us, there's a YouTube version out there where it sounds exactly like the Canyons EP, you know, if it were part of that.
Right, it's just him and his trusty old MIDI grand.
Yeah, so I'll put that link in the show notes, actually, so that everybody can go out and check out the video of acoustic version of this song. So do you have like a special memory or a connection to this song specifically?
I guess not this one so specifically.
Mm-hmm. So more of the album overall? More
of the album overall, just like having very vivid memories of when it broke. And yeah, I don't know that I have any specific memories of this one. Just it's one of my favorites from the album.
Well, Andrew told this to Billboard magazine about the lyrics to Canyon Moon. He said, "Canyon Moon is really the story of a girl escaping Los Angeles. It's not necessarily my story, but I think there were a lot of elements of the canyon in that song and my own love-hate history with Los Angeles." So one could actually draw parallels to Andrew's life after Jack's Mannequin ended and he, quote, escaped L.A. with his wife to move out of town. They live about an hour outside of L.A. now, near the beach, but a little bit outside the city. So I don't know if you'd call that a suburb or what, but I found that to be interesting that he wrote a supposedly fictional story about someone leaving L.A., but you could say it's part of his life as well.
Right. Well, I mean, especially if you look at like the lyrics to the chorus, it's a very classic kind of like Jack Antonoffian, blues in the verses, gospel in the chorus sort of thing.
Okay.
Where, that chorus could kind of be about anything almost. Everyone sort of has these, times in their life where a situation doesn't work out the way they want it to. And it's kind of useful to just, abandon it as much physically and emotionally as you can. And, it's like this kind of rallying cry around that. But I think, he points to specific moments, like the little town in a faded beauty. They still remember when she was queen, and this kind of classic story of LA, of people, being a big fish in a small pond and then going to LA to find themselves, an incredibly small fish in a vast pond, and then eventually needing to leave LA because they're, burnt out of it. And everyone I know who lives in LA kind of echoes that story about how draining that city can be because of that sort of feeling that you're kind of too big for the place you came from, but not big enough for Los Angeles.
Right. You went to the big city. You were maybe, like you said, a big fish in your hometown. Went to the big city and it kind of chewed you up and spit you out, and you're like, I can't handle this. I got to get out of here. I was actually just watching a documentary last night, and it wasn't about this subject specifically, but it happened to have a Hollywood actor on it, and he was talking about how he was saying, I just need to get out of Los Angeles, man. It's just, it's tough, and he's a well-paid famous actor that was saying this, but I think it's very different from where a lot of these people grew up, and it wears on them.
Right. Because, I mean, if you think about kind of the way we interact with our ambition, it's a projected grander version of ourselves. And, emotionally at some points, we do have to kind of come back down to earth a little bit. And I think as soon as you do that, you kind of get hit with that feeling a lot.
Oh, yeah. So I read that McMahon, Griffin, and Hollander wrote this song in about 4 hours' time. And then they kind of shelved it for a little while, or McMahon shelved it himself maybe. And then after sitting on it, he came back to it a while back and then kind of rewrote parts of it. I found that kind of interesting from a songwriting perspective. And I'm sure that happens with a lot of artists. You work on a song and you feel like you've worked it to death and you're just like, okay, I'm just going to let it sit here for a while. And you come back to it and you're like, okay, I can see some changes that need to be made now. So
Right. I mean, I think that, especially with the way a lot of people I know who, write great songs, the way they work is it's often great to do that because you can gain distance from it and kind of do what the song needs in some sense rather than what you feel like the song needs or what you want to express emotionally with the song.
Right.
And so a lot of the way a lot of people will write is they'll, revisit a song a few times over the course of a year and just sort of put it down and not think about it until it's sort of polished to, its sort of perfect form.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard from some artists, whether it be authors, musicians, filmmakers, that their artwork is never done. They always feel like they could improve it every time they hear it or read it or see it, whatever the artwork may be. They think of things they could have done to make it better. I don't know if you've ever felt that way about something you've made, but...
Well, I feel that way about everything I've ever made. Especially...
Okay, so maybe that's just an artist thing.
Well, in my day-to-day life, I work as an architect. And so part of architecture is sort of, running the idea of a building and, the design and how a building's going to be built through as many hoops as possible to make sure that basically the person who goes to build it can't mess it up. Kind of in the end, it's kind of not up to you whether things work the way you want them to. You can only sort of project how you think they're going to work. So in that sense, it's kind of never done because there's always ways you could tweak it to sort of fit what role you want it to have and what emotional resonances you want it to have because, you can't predict the way people are going to emotionally react to something or what people are going to do with it,
It sounds like your job is a lot like being an artist where you have a vision and you're putting it down and letting someone else interpret it, just like an artist puts his or her work out in the world and for other people to interpret.
Yeah, 100%.
So I really like the way this song opens. It's really powerful. That piano paired with a beat kind of sets a tone at the beginning. It has this atmospheric sound to it. Kind of like we talked about how it's kind of dark for an Andrew song, right?
Right. It actually reminds me a lot of that first Bastille album. I don't know how much familiar you are with them.
Pretty familiar, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about a song like Things We Lost in the Fire, it begins with almost that same sort of echoey sort of sound,
Yeah, I never would have thought to draw that comparison. Now I need to go back and listen to that song. That's a great song.
Yeah, well, I was listening to it this morning or today on the drive back from a hike I went on, and all I could think about was how similar it sounded production-wise to the song Pompeii by them because of just how anthemic the drums sounded and the fact that Pompeii was kind of in the same genre and was huge like the year before, and how it kind of felt like he was trying to do his version of that almost with the song.
Okay, I could see that, and yeah, both our album openers as well.
Right,
kind of setting the tone for the record. See, one thing I hear in this song, and I don't know what you think about this, and I hear a modern day Phil Collins type of vocals and melody in there. Are you familiar with the song "Another Day in Paradise" by Phil Collins?
I am not.
Okay, so it's a pop ballad from the mid '80s.
Okay,
and it's real slow and airy, has some piano, but I swear if you sped up that song and put a beat to it, you'd have something close to Canyon Moon. So I was listening to Canyon Moon earlier today, and I was thinking, man, what's that melody? And I was like, oh, it's kind of like Another Day in Paradise. And I don't think it was intentional. I think it's just the influence of some of those artists, like Bruce Hornsby and the Range from the 80s, and Phil Collins and other guys like that, things he grew up listening to.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, anytime you are, doing any work, it's a lot easier to make good work if you're sort of standing on the shoulders of giants, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
So I think if he's, borrowing from these places, I think that's, he's sitting himself within the legacy of that way of working, and is probably also familiar with, where they borrowed their ideas from and where that person before them borrowed their ideas from, and is sort of putting himself within that.
It feels like from the beginning, it's just the whole first verse is a build up to that chorus. It's like a build, 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 bam, you get hit with the chorus.
Right. There's also something I like really. I think the major production choice that I really liked in the song is right after that first verse, there's that break, and there's like that cool like vocoder sort of wobble thing that happens in the background.
You said it's after the first chorus?
It's after the first verse. So like in that
verse.
sort of break between the first two verses, California in her rear view. There's that sort of chanting part there after it.
Tell me more about that. What you said, you think it's like a vocoder that he's using?
Yeah, and well, to me, yeah, it's clearly like a vocoder kind of wobble sort of thing because sounds like it's sidechained to the vocal, which means that it's sort of the sound is oscillating up and down based on what the vocal is doing, so it kind of ducks out of the way when the vocal comes in, and it gives it this sort of wobbling effect and sort of fills in the space of the vocal.
Okay.
And so you hear it throughout the rest of the song, and maybe not in the choruses because it's kind of hard to hear anything except for the drums and his vocals in the chorus, but in the verses and in the break, you can hear the way it's sort of pumping in and out as like this background effect to fill up that frequency range. And I think it was just a nice contemporary kind of thing to do at that point, and probably now.
I think the last 15 seconds of the song is equally powerful to the beginning for a different reason. The piano and the drums go away, and there's only lead vocals, backing vocals, and the beat left for a few seconds. And then by the final seconds, you just have Andrew saying that last line solo, kind of got away from you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the minimalist power of that ending. It's just so it feels very abrupt, but it works on getting there for a little while, but you don't even realize it until the abrupt ending, and that's kind of what I like about it.
Right, because it's kind of, it was like one of these songs where they had this killer hook, and it sounds like they built the rest of the song around it,
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's kind of very honest to the way they wrote the song that they would also end on that,
Yeah, because he repeats that main line a few times, the main lines a few times. So
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the lyrics specifically now. You mentioned some lyrics earlier, but we have an idea of what Andrew was thinking about when he wrote the song with the girl leaving the big city of LA. The theme feels pretty dark, as we talked about, and it sounds to me like she had a bad experience there and had to get out. There's definitely evidence that the fall maybe reminds her of home, and that she was someone important in her hometown. At least she felt like someone important. He says, the leaves are falling, the church bells ringing, marching band in a high school dream, little town in a faded beauty, they still remember when she was queen. It's almost like she's picturing her life back home and thinking, that was someplace I was important. This isn't me out here. I don't know. What do you think about that?
He's thinking about how, our memories of being in different places almost feel like these past lives we lived, especially when you kind of haven't had any sort of real success in a while.
Right.
Because success for people, success takes so long to reach, these kind of climaxes, and then often it sort of, fades and you kind of have to rebuild, and I think that's true for anyone in any walk of life and any level of success,
Yeah.
That line in the verse is about her trying to, appreciate this high point that she had to help her, deal with this low point she was in.
Right. Yeah, and I think where it really transitions is, California in her rear view. She couldn't handle another season, another ocean of fiction blue. Said a prayer to a dashboard Jesus, Death Valley and worn out shoes. Then the road turned into desert everywhere, and that's where it leads to the chorus, of course. But it's almost like this is her deciding to leave or thinking about leaving and either going back home or I don't know.
Right. I think the song makes it very unclear. I think it's all got a hint to the fact that she just kind of disappears.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to talk about. So and I know it's a fictional story, and I take it as that. But, I still, just like I like to read books and watch films, and I like to talk lyrics, and I'm thinking in the story that he's telling, she couldn't handle it. She had to leave, but he does say it. He says she disappeared. And then I've heard this lyric 1,000 times, but I never really thought about it much. One of the final lyrics of the song, and where she ended, no one knew. Is she gone, or is she just gone in the minds of the people who knew her?
That's a lot to think about, right? Because you could also interpret that she became someone else to become successful and disappeared, the minds of the people she knew before,
Yeah, you're right. Maybe she had to become someone else to reach the success or the level of success that she wanted to.
Yeah, which I
like that interpretation.
Is kind of a classic model. Is you can have the success you want, you just have to become a completely different person.
Did you notice that one of the lyrics say, in the chorus, the main part of the song, take all your troubles, put them to bed, burn down the mission, maps in your head, the maps in your head. There's another place on this record that he talks about maps.
The maps to the getaway.
Yeah, and it's also used as a metaphor for kind of getting away from something. There's two songs. One's the opening, one's the closing of the record, and they're both referring to maps in such a way that someone is using them to get out of somewhere or leave somewhere.
Right. Well, I think it's maybe some greater point about his career and the way his career was kind of taking a weird turn at this point, and how we can sort of plan out the way we want things to play out in our lives all we want. But, those maps are often, deceptive, I guess.
Yeah.
Or change with time as maybe, an actual map becomes outdated eventually.
Oh, that's true. Yep. Yeah, I don't know if it's a metaphor for an actual paper map or just the path you're taking, like you said about his career.
Right.
Metaphor for his career as well.
Right, or just, I think maybe more generally, it's probably just about the plans we make in our heads for ourselves and where we want our futures to go.
And like you said, how they change, they have to shift sometimes.
Right.
Do you have a specific favorite part of the song, whether it be musically or lyrically?
Right. So as I kind of pointed to, I love that vocoder sort of wobble thing.
Yeah.
I also really love like the bass line in the choruses, especially. The bass line is following the melody really closely.
Okay.
As opposed to just like, playing the notes of the chord. And I always love it when bass lines do that and, extend beyond just hitting the root notes. Because in the bass tone and everything is just phenomenal on here.
Yeah, I've tried to get better at picking out those individual instruments in songs. Sometimes I have trouble with that part of it, but
right.
That's really cool to have that perspective there, where you can kind of pick out a piece of the song and an instrument in the song.
Well, right. I mean, especially as like from the position that was kind of approaching this for this conversation, which was more as a producer, if you will.
Yeah.
I'm listening to the song in production headphones, which are or production studio monitors, which are designed so you can hear every individual detail of a song that you might not hear on like a car stereo or on like a radio.
As far as Andrew McMahon albums go, this is a good one to listen to on those.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't honestly don't think the mix is all that great on here because I think it's just it's very overblown because it's just trying to be as huge as possible.
Okay.
As my one like sole critique I have of this song is it's just like you can sort of make out the drums and you can make out the vocals, but you can't really make out anything else for the most part.
Okay. That's fair though.
Yeah. About listening to it like with production ears and like with production equipment, I can hear that bass line in the background and it's actually really, really kind of nice, and maybe wish they would have highlighted it more.
All right. Yeah, my favorite part is the end of the song that I mentioned earlier, just kind of the slowly, getting to that minimalist point where it's just his vocals at the end and kind of the abrupt stop. I felt like it's like, whoa, what just happened? That's kind of my reaction at the end.
It also makes a really great transition into Cecilia because it stops very abruptly and then Cecilia begins super abruptly as well.
Yeah. Yep.
It like really kicks off like the ambition of like it as like a serious pop record in a very clear way.
Right. So we mentioned some other versions that are out there earlier. There's that acoustic live version on YouTube, which I said reminded me of the Canyons EP that they did with some of the songs from this record. And then there's also a live band version on YouTube. And that one kind of took me back to seeing it in concert because that's what it sounded like to me. My final thoughts on this song is it's a hell of an opener for an album. It has that build up and the pacing's perfect in my opinion. It leads you, like you pointed out, it was great. I was going to say the same thing. It sets you up really well for Cecilia right afterward. And in my opinion, this record was different from anything he had done previously. So it kind of sets your expectation for the whole record.
Right.
And the fact that it's a little bit darker than some of the other material, most of the other material he's done, it lets you know this is going to be a serious solo album, a reflection on pieces of his life. So I don't know. What are your kind of final thoughts on the song as a whole?
Well, I think something you made me sort of think about is listening through other songs in the album is I think this song is actually probably one of the most similar. Maybe Rainy Girl is like an exception, but more similar to his work at Jack's Mannequin than the other ones. So I think it's kind of almost consciously trying to bridge the gap between Jack's Mannequin and Andrew McMahon in the Wilderness in some way.
Yeah, I guess I could see that.
You know what I mean? Because, I mean, if you listen, like, to the end, like, by the end of the record where you have, songs like Maps to the Getaway or, Black and White Movies, those are straight up, like, EDM songs, like, straight up synth rock. Whereas this, the piano is still, piano and, like, the live drums are still really dominant.
Yeah, a little bit of rock and roll still in there.
Still a little bit of rock and roll.
So, speaking of Maps for the Getaway again, fun fact, this song, Canyon Moon, was featured on an episode of Quantico. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. I don't know.
Nope.
Yeah, the show didn't last very long, but I just happened to catch it somewhere. But Maps for the Getaway was also in the same episode. So, interestingly, those two songs are the songs that were chosen by Andrew McMahon to be featured in that one episode.
All right. And I mean, obviously, as we pointed out, those songs kind of have interesting parallels as the beginning and ending of the album, and then to be featured, I guess, in the same episode of a show sort of checks out, right?
Right. So where do you think this song in the Andrew McMahon catalog that you're familiar with and that you enjoy, where does this song rate and all that?
I'm not sure, because I think I would put it in the upper echelon of like the pop songs he's written.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it feels as kind of personal as a lot of the other stuff he's done.
True.
In the same way, where even like, the hit single from this album is a lot more personal than the song is. This is more him just being a storyteller rather than him sort of narrating his own life through his work, I guess, in some way. So I think it's like a great indie pop song, and was, very responsive to the trends at the time, which I think is something he's done with all of his projects, is try to react to what was happening at that time and put it through his lens, so to speak.
Also in the upper echelon for me, I agree with you that it's not as personal as a lot of the songs, and that's something I really, really enjoy about Andrew's music, is how personal it is, how vulnerable he is in his lyrics, and even in the music, it just feels personal. Again, we can draw parallels, if you will, to his life, but it's not quite as personal as, like you said, as something like Cecilia or even All Our Lives or Maps for the Getaway.
Or, especially, his earlier work, it doesn't really come close in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah, he's usually written some pretty personal lyrics.
Right. I think that was a lot of the appeal.
Are there other songs that you would draw comparisons to or kind of put in the same musical category, if you will?
I think High Dive was pretty apt.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really listen to the two albums that followed this one with the same kind of, I guess, intensity.
Okay, cool. Thank you for listening, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast and rate it any place you can. We're now on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Podbean, Deezer, Stitcher, and more. Don't forget to visit and like our Facebook page, Instagram, and Twitter feed, Something in the Wilderness, and post a comment, because I'd love for you to let me know what you think. Also, I now have some Something in the Wilderness stickers to give away. If you want one, shoot me an email at somethinginthewilderness@gmail.com, and I'll be glad to mail you one. They're free. And if you want to follow in Hypotech's footsteps and be a guest on the show, drop me a line. My goal is to give those of you listening out there a place where you can expect song discussion about the songs that we all love. I want to again thank Hypotech from the EDM Obscura podcast one more time for joining us today. Thank you so much, Hypotech. It was great having you. I thought we had a really great discussion and loved hearing your opinions on the song.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It was a good time. And I'm pretty much on the same platforms, just EDM Obscura or Hypotech EDM Obscura. Sometimes I get a little buried because there are a lot of EDM podcasts.
Yeah, so definitely check out EDM Obscura if you are interested and you want to hear more from Hypotech. Until next time, don't let the sun run out on this cold October.